dog. Before he could go to rescue, a man came and he jumps into the scene, and then he fights with the dog, kills him, and saved the boy. So the journalist who was witnessing this whole incident, he took pictures of the incident in his iPhone, and then runs over to both of these people, the victim and the savior, and he said, "Oh wow, what was this? What happened just now?" I was actually seeing this incident very closely, and we are going to put you on the front page of the New York Times under the heading "Brave New Yorker Saves Small Boy from a Mad Dog." So this is going to be the heading, and I'll be telecasting my videos and photographs on the news channel and also on the print media. So then the savior said, I'm actually not an American. I'm not an American. So he said, okay, then the heading would be, and he said, I'm not a New Yorker as well. So then he said, who are you? I said, I'm a Pakistani. At that time he said, I'm a Pakistani who has come here to study. So he said, then I'll see what to do. And next day what he did was, the New Yorker gave the news, and the news published was Islamic fundamentalist, illegal alien, murders innocent American dog, links to Al-Qaeda being investigated. This is how the whole Islamophobia and the anti-Muslim racism is being propagated and being manifested throughout the globe. As of now in India, what we see is...
Mr. Suhail, may I
request?
Hello. Sorry for intervention.
Hello, yeah.
Is it possible to come over video? There are people who would like to see.
I'm actually afraid that this internet connection is not it's not fast. It's very slow. So it may disconnect.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay, I'll convey them. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. So now in India, it's being manifested in different ways. Like for instance, we have seen the propaganda of love jihad. We have seen the propaganda of Muslim population may take over the Indian mass, and then they may even manipulate democracy. And they have spread this population anxiety so much so that people have become so nervous, and they are thinking of even of mandatory population control of Muslims and so on. And there is also the propaganda of Muslims being traitors. And you have seen the recent propaganda on the issue of Corona jihad at the time of the Tablighi Jamaat fiasco across the media. So Corona jihad. Now, when the Tablighi Jamaat people started giving plasma and saving the Corona victims, they started the propaganda of plasma jihad. So in different ways and means, whatever the Muslims or the people from the Muslim community tends to do, it is labeled as something which is anti-national or something which is anti-social and so on. So basically Islamophobia, when we say Islamophobia, people tends to, some at least, tends to raise the question that Islamophobia doesn't exist, and it is not Islamophobia which exists, it is Muslim phobia. Or some people tends to say this is not racism. This is not racism because Muslims are not one single race or one single ethnic identity. So people starts to raise questions on the very idea of Islamophobia normally. So actually Islamophobia has been defined in various by various institutions. I would like to quote some of them. The UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. In a report, they defined Islamophobia as, I quote, a baseless hostility and fear vis-a-vis Islam, and as a result, a fear of and aversion towards all Muslims or the majority of them. In brackets, Islamophobia also refers to the practical consequences of this hostility in terms of discrimination, prejudices, and unequal treatment of which Muslims are victims, and the exclusion from major political and social spheres. So this is the United Nations Human Rights Council document number 6/6, 21 August 2007, which is available on the net. The European Commission defines Islamophobia as a fear of or prejudiced viewpoint towards Islam, Muslims, and matters pertaining to them, which are taking the shape of daily forms of racism and discrimination, or more violent forms. Islamophobia is a violation of human rights. EUMC 2007, page 61. So basically, all major institutions which has tried to define Islamophobia has defined it as a kind of racism. It is basically the idea that Muslims as the identity are basically inferior or subhuman than the others. So the others are the mainstream, or the people who are representing themselves as the Deshbhakt, or people who represents themselves as associated with their own nationalist identity. They believe that these people are less nationalist than us. These are less Indians than us. These are less Britishers than us. These are less Americans than us. So this subhuman labeling of Muslims is one of the major factors, or the major form of manifesting Islamophobia. So that is how the whole issue comes in. This is basically otherization. This otherization project defines politics, it defines culture, it defines economy, religion, and identity, by actually magnifying the differences between the nationalist identity and Islam, and then transforming them into an existential threat in the minds of the general mass population. In India, it's Indians, which in turn promotes a false sense of patriotic unity. This is how this whole thing props up. So this is not only limited to India. This is a completely coordinated global political project, which tends to create or facilitate marginalizing of Muslims from civic and political life. This hate and hostility actually permeates not only into the society, but also permeates into Muslim community itself, where Muslims see themselves as outsiders of civic and political life. So this has got actually very deep implications as far as a community within a society is concerned. They are completely in a span of small duration. This particular community tends to completely marginalize themselves from the whole civilizational affairs. So this is how Islamophobia manifests, and this is the implication of this particular racism. So this has got deep connections with the clash of civilizations concept, which was actually written and given shape by Samuel P. Huntington in his book Clash of Civilization. He said that in the coming years and in the coming times, what is going to see, what the world is going to witness is not a war between countries. It will be it will be clash of civilizations. It will be war of civilizations. And Muslims will be, and Islam will be the primary identity within which this clash of civilization will be seen, where the West on the one side and Muslims on the other side as a first tendency that we will see. This is a kind of theorization that he did. Apart from the Buddhist civilization, the Hindu civilization, and the Chinese civilization, and so on. So basically, earlier, what we have seen in the history was the racism towards Jews, which we have seen in the history of the 1920s and 1930s, where Jews have been subjected to Holocaust, and the final solution, and those gas chambers, and the whole history that we are well aware of. It was a complete annihilation or cleansing of a particular community from the country. So, and then what we see is the blacks, the history of blacks. What we see is the history of blacks. I think there is some voice coming in.
लेख भाई
जी जी
लेख भाई आपका ऑडियो म्यूट करिए प्लीज.
ओके ठीक है सॉरी
ऑडियो म्यूट कीजिए. या
So yes, so we have seen the same sort of racism against the blacks in the Europe, in America, in various parts of the world, where the blacks are seen as inferior, and they are seen as antisocial and criminals, and they have been, and this also has manifested in ways how Muslims are being treated in India. Like they have been lynched, they have been killed, and they have been subjected to mass riots. And we have seen this all across this history of racism, where these those so-called inferior race or group are subjected to torture and riots and ethnic cleansing, and then cases are registered against them, allegations are made against against themselves. So this is a trend that we see even today in India. So in India, how when you see the common pattern or the content of Islamophobia, what it contains, and what is the reason of Islamophobia or hate towards and fear of Muslims, is that number one, Muslims are considered to be anti-Hindu. Muslims are considered to be basically anti-Hindu. That is how we see the Pandits' exodus in Kashmir. This is quoted as one of the evidences. They kill cows because they are anti-Hindu. They are for reservation, and that means that they don't agree to the fact that everyone should be given equal opportunity, and Muslims should be basically not be given reservation. So reservation is basically anti-Hindu. Minority appeasement of the secular groups is basically anti-Hindu. So Islamophobia also consists of the fact that the mainstream secular parties, they say that they allege that secular parties also have been appeasing Muslims, and they are also anti-Hindu. So they are anti-Hindu because also they are against the Ram Mandir and so on. So they have many evidences to prove that Muslims are anti-Hindu. And number two, the cause of this the hate is that Muslims are basically evil, and Islam and Muslims cannot be integrated into the secular and liberal society. They are inherently violent. Islam and Muslims supports terrorism. They are anti-humanism. They are basically bad people. Maar diya jayega, kaat diya jayega. Islamic terrorists. They oppress women and so on. So they are basically mother of all evils. And number three, the content of Islamophobia in India, especially, is they are traitors. They don't believe in India, or they don't love this country. They are not nationalistic enough. They tends to forget all the sacrifices done by the Muslims. They don't agree Vande Mataram Muslims. Muslims don't have first and foremost, when they ask what are you first, they say that I am first Muslim and then Indian. So they are not first Indian and then second Muslim, as if they are mutually exclusive identities. So they are Pakistan supporters. These are the evidences normally which are told to support the fact that they are traitors. And number four is the population anxiety, that Muslims population is increasing in a scale that they will overtake the Hindu community, and then there are high fertility rates. They are basically converting people. They have certain hypnotizing power, and they brainwash people to convert. They do love jihad apart from all this. So this is basically the fourth thing. And number five is the Mughal history. Basically, in history, they have been against Hindus. They have did robbery, and they have looted this country. So it is now time to revenge. So these are the most prevalent five anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic sentiments that we see when you go into the content of Islamophobia in India. So this has penetrated deep, far and wide. It is also the responsibility of Muslim community, especially those who are into intellectual works, that they try and refute these arguments. This is very important as far as Muslim organizations are concerned. And how do you solve this issue? How do you develop a sustainable strategic response to Islamophobia? So basically, there are 4 steps approach. One is defining Islamophobia. You will have to define Islamophobia in Indian context, if you have to at all. And number 2 is documenting Islamophobia, systematic and structured recording and documentation of different manifestations of Islamophobia. And number 3 is deconstructing Islamophobic narratives. And number 4 is reconstructing new positive and realistic narratives around Muslims. So these are the 4 basic steps, macro level and at a broad level, that you have to deal with this problem and how you solve this problem. So when you go into the detail, the thing is, first and foremost, what you have to do is you will have to document the ongoing Islamophobic hate crimes happening in India. So documenting is a big step. It's big of evidences. It is basically recording all reported incidences of, at least at the first stage, if you can track and record all reported incidences. You have dotodatabase.com, which does this in India. In case of you want to refer to the database, just dotodatabase.com, I think, will help us. And number 2 is build a theoretical framework for Islamophobia in India. And number 3 would be audit government policies and their impact on Muslims, on Muslim minorities, and thereby identifying structural Islamophobia. And number 4 would be identifying hatred's main purveyors and trying to deter these anti-Muslim hate groups through advocacy efforts. And number 5 is identifying the fueling factors within the Muslim community, factors of Islamophobia from within the community, and formulate response. And basically thereby actually developing a sustainable and strategic response to Islamophobia. So coalitions need to be made across communities and across political spectrum to address this racist tendency. So I think this issue is very far, wide, and deep. It has actually come into the hearts of the very fabric of this country. Unless and until there is a very sustained and very effective efforts to address this issue, this is going to manifest in various and very dangerous ways, and it may actually create big losses in terms of life, properties, and also in various other ways. So I think this discussion, this is not, I was not a lecture, this is not a speech. I was trying to deliberate myself as a talk, a tea talk, because this is Ramzan, there cannot be tea, there can only be talk. So it was basically a one-to-one talk, basically. And let's try to identify the problem and then try to bring a solution to this ongoing problem. So by this, I would like to end my talk, and let's have more discussions on this.
That's great. Very precise and focused point you have brought, like the 4 issues which you brought before us. Defining Islamophobia, documenting Islamophobia and what are the manifestations, deconstructing and reconstructing. In fact, these are the areas which is more challenged in everyday life of all Muslims and others as well. There is one question, Mr. Suhail, that Kavita says, I agree with your statements and explanation, but all Muslims are not trustable because they just don't behave like to be trusted. I mean, this is very common narrative we have. How do you respond on that?
Actually, this is exactly how racism functions. That you label the community with a prejudice and a stereotype. Like this is one, that they cannot be trusted. Jews cannot be trusted. The blacks cannot be trusted. The African Americans cannot be trusted. They are violent, for instance. Whatever incidences of violence happens, it is labeled on or generalized on the whole community. It is you have labeled on the whole community. So trust and truthfulness is basically individual. It is related to individuals. It is basically not a community affair. It is something which is very much personal. So things like this, which are totally irrational and illogic. So that is why racism is irrational. Racism and Islamophobia is illogic. It tends to create a sort of label or a kind of stereotype to generalize the whole community and then say that these people are evil. So this is basically irrational. It is something which we have to address while addressing the issue of Islamophobia.
There's one important question that, what could be done at a global level in terms of framing a law against Islamophobia? Is there any possibility, or can UN also be part of this? I mean, intervene into this and make it, punishable by law? That can also help others to create better stories in everyday life.
Yes, this is very important question, basically, because racism can only be stopped in this. If it's in this level, it can only be stopped by a state machinery enacting laws and making policies which address this particular racist concern. So across the globe, what we see is that there has been serious discussions happening on how to enact laws, special laws, addressing this racism. In recent times, one of such steps was the 2017 Canadian Parliament. They had approved M103. It's basically a non-abiding motion that calls on the government to condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. And this actually was passed in the parliament in the margin to 201:91. So the predominant majority of the parliament members, they supported this motion. And the same thing happened in the British Parliament as well. There were a number of legislations, there were a number of basically resolutions which were passed in the British Parliament against Islamophobia. Even they defined Islamophobia in the British Parliament, clearly has stating that Islamophobia is racism. It is basically not a mere prejudice and hate towards Islam and Muslims. This is basically racism against Muslims. So I think this is having a linear progression that policymakers are thinking on this direction. We, as different Muslim groups, Muslim communities, civil society groups, have to actually raise this voice at this particular juncture of history that we need a special law to curb this problem. When the post-World War, after the Holocaust episode happened, there were serious discussions happening on anti-Semitic discourse happening in the world. And this has led to enactments where laws have been made addressing the anti-Semitism problem, the racism against Jews. So anti-Semitic laws are very stringent in American countries, in European countries till today. And India, for the last 5,000 years, we have witnessed the subjugation and basically oppression of the lower castes of India. What we did was we enacted a law, not one law, but we have 4 different laws which addresses this issue of caste system in India and discrimination based on caste, including the Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act. So this is high time actually to enact a law if the state or if the policymakers intend, or if not, this demand and this discourse and this discussion should arise at this particular point in time.
Very important elaborations. There is very interesting question that can you elaborate more on the area of documentations, that how can we institutionalize the documentations? Everyone talks about, and then when you want to look for any archives and documentation, people are unaware, So can you give your responses on that?
Regarding documentation, I think you have many models which are even in prevailing in India. You have the documentation of caste-based discrimination and attacks, especially the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. You have discrimination documentation happening in India. You have the documentation against Christians, attacks and discrimination against Christians. Incidences have been documented by ADF, for instance. You have Islamophobia documentation across different parts of Europe and American countries, where especially Muslim Islam are in the line of attack. They are documented, small or big, by, for instance, the UC Berkeley Islamophobia department under Hatim Bazian. You have the the detailed Islamophobia reports coming from various institutions and scholars across the globe. To name a few, you have the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which does detailed documentation of Islamophobia incidences across the world. You have the Turkish organization SETA, SETA, which does a detailed report, yearly report on Islamophobia. You have the Farid Hafiz does European Islamophobia yearly documentation, the Farid Hafiz documentation on Islamophobia. You have the CAIR, CAIR, Council of American Islamic Relations, doing Islamophobia report on a yearly basis. You have SPLC doing it. I mentioned UC Berkeley Center for Race and Gender. Hatim Bazian does it. There are various places. You have Marwan Muhammad Collective Against Islamophobia in France, which does this on a massive scale. You have Al Sharq Forum, Wada Khanfar, who does this on a yearly basis. Joseph Stiglitz. You have many other people who does this on a very timely basis. So I think in India we have a serious lack. We lack the comprehensive documentation of all Islamophobic incidences. One of the major steps was the DOTO database, which you have online now, DOTO, which is basically documentation of the oppressed, DOTO database.com. This is addressing not only Muslims, but this is not basically an Islamophobia documentation. This is attacks which has been reported on the news media and discrimination which has been reported against any targeted minorities in India, be it Christians or Muslims or Farsis, or be it any minorities which is defined in the constitution, are documented in this particular database. So I think there are serious steps being taken. I already know one or two already which have started. I think in the coming days we will witness some big database which addresses this particular problem in India.
Yeah, that's quite informing, Suhail sir. I'm mixing up a couple of questions, like when you talk of forces of Islamophobia, which is very strong, not in our country, state level, or in the agenda of the parties, but across the globe itself. So, and then narratives which is brought on in the name of, like, for example, Kashmiri Pandits, and then people who have come from other countries and settled here and becoming more extremist, etc. When these narratives are brought at different levels, so is it people feel that is it very small initiative by civil society to counter such a big force, or how do you address apart from database creations?
I think when it comes to the solution of the problem of Islamophobia, it should be addressed phase by phase. So in the first phase should be what I said is about tracking and recording the incidences of Islamophobia, building a theoretical framework, auditing of government policies, and thereby identifying the structural Islamophobia, networking with individuals and institutions working on this issue, and identifying hatred's main purveyors, and trying to deter these anti-Muslim hate groups, and things like that. These are the first phase, where you basically it is identifying Islamophobia and identifying the problem, defining it, and identifying the groups. This forms the first phase. And the second phase would be based on this whole documentation, identifying the problem. You will be doing basically trying to develop a sustainable and strategic response to Islamophobia. This is the second phase, where you even raise movements to raise the voice of an anti-Islamophobia law, or large-scale media advocacy, building coalitions, parliamentary debates, organizing movemental and international advocacy, and things like that, and strategic litigation. Even inside the courts, we can do certain interventions which may create dominoes effects, and then which lead to an enactment, or which ultimately leads to a policy making by the state, and things like that. So it should be a phase by phase approach. And I think the second, third, and fourth phase, if at all, has to be made. It has to be made on the basis of the works of the first phase, which is basically identifying the problem based on the documentation. So yeah, so it's a gradual step-by-step process wherein you address the issue and solve the problem.
In continuation to that, do we have some hope and envisioning where at state level also within our country, that small scale level, I mean, state can take some initiative to frame law and counter the Islamophobia or incident, in the name of mob lynching or etc., and can give guidance to other states that look, through these legislations, these incidents and problem of Islamophobia can be reduced. Do you envision into that?
Can you come again? Can you just repeat the question?
The question was like, is it any? Do we have any possibility where states, like for example, any state of the country, can frame their own law to counter Islamophobia, and this will also guide other states to frame, other legislations, and then Islamophobia can be reduced if it is not at all India level at once?
I think this is also part of the strategies of how to deal with it. This is, of course, possible that at least a state level policy is made. But as far as the law is concerned, I think it should be a blanket law across the country. We can, of course, deal in a way that those states, it can be a strategy, it should be discussed and debated. Those states which is politically favorable to this can start initiating discussions on this and try to have enact a law or make a policy to address this issue. But I think all this has to be done as a second phase, where after the first phase homework is done.
Okay. There are several incidents and then questions. I'm clubbing 3-4 questions together. Sheikh Muhammad Salahuddin, Ritvik Tyagi, like, mainstream, the role of mainstream media in terms of propagating Islamophobia in India is very worse. And an individual, when he or she tries to encounter it, even the example somebody is saying that even my friends are becoming very angry and enemy to me because I talk of or I try to encounter that this is not right. So at the civil society level, how can people encounter and try to address when even giving any explanation on Twitter or social media, it attracts draconian law of the country? So, and recent incident of chairperson of Delhi Minority Commissions. So can you reflect and guide others?
Basically, the question is that how can civil society act? Is it?
Yeah.
Yes. The civil society, I think, be it civil society as an institution or individuals, the biggest role as of now is doing the discussions. It's basically debating on this issue. Discussions should start. So starting the discussion will not in any way attract silencing or attacking by the oppressors, by the state, or by the Sangh Parivar, or whatever. So I think what you have to do is basic discussions and debates should happen, and that is how civil society works. It's not a movement. It is not a political party. It is a place where you do serious discussions. It's a space where the strategies are formulated or discussed. So I think that apprehension or that fear need not. It's not valid at any cost. We need to start this discussion. That only will lead to a solution to the problem. As I mentioned earlier, this is a completely coordinated political project happening to divide and rule this country, basically to rule by creating animosity between communities. So the first step, as I mentioned, is actually the civil society has to work seriously in terms of documentation, discussions, seminars should happen. I actually really sincerely would like to appreciate the organizers of this meeting, that even at this time, when we all are fighting this epidemic of COVID-19, we are discussing on this, because it's not a coincidence actually that we are discussing Islamophobia at this COVID-19 times. It is also a reality that Islamophobia has multiplied. It has actually become at least double or quadruple in this particular time of Islamophobia at this time of COVID-19, because almost all are spending hours, if not the entire day, in front of their phones and in front of social media. And since this Islamophobia creation is a missionary, it's a large-scale coordinated machine which is working of fake newses, of stereotypes, of hate mongering. People are hearing this kind of hate from morning till evening at this COVID times when they are inside their houses. But natural Islamophobia has increased unlike never before. So it's natural that we discuss this at this particular time, and I appreciate this organizers. I think this should continue, and that will form the first step towards solving the problem. And we need not worry, or we need not fear of the consequences. We should be very sure that we don't cross the borders. We should be aware of the law of the land, and then we have to daringly, unapologetically, and with bravery stand up, and then you have try to solve the problem, address the issue.
Do you also, Ritvik is asking, do you also see RSS is playing some role of in terms of indoctrinating the idea that Islam is bad in the minds of Hindus, where many Hindus are having secular values, but they are being given these ideas, and how do we counter those at the community level?
There has been a PhD research by Dr. Muhammad Nawab Usman, basically from Singapore. He has been doing his PhD at the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and now he's in the UC Berkeley University working as a lecturer. He did Islamophobia. He did the PhD on Islamophobia in India and the politics of positionality, a comparison of India, Myanmar, and Malaysia. That is his thesis. So what he identified was the Indian Islamophobia is the primary proponents, or the primary source of Islamophobia in India is basically the Hindutva politics, and which is patronized by the RSS. You can see his work on the internet. So, and also there are n number of papers on racism and hate politics in India in various universities, and even you can also see the recent resolution made in the US, which clearly mentions Bajrang Dal and the Hindutva forces on जो है creating animosity, even RSS जो है creating animosity and hatred against the different communities. So it is undoubtedly that this particular trend has come from the narrative that has been built by them, patronized by them. We have not even seen a single statement made by this particular organization, RSS, or its leaders, saying that whatever the IT cell, BJP IT cell, is propagating. If you want to see what they are propagating, you can to have a glimpse of how they function, the IT cell functions. I would recommend to read the book, The I Am a Troll, which is written by Swati Chaturvedi, a renowned journalist in India, which clearly defines and clearly tries to dig in to the works being done by the Hindutva forces in India, especially through the social media activism. So we have not seen any statement or any efforts being made by the RSS against this particular hate mongering or things. We have rather seen many people from this organization steering and leading the role of creating animosity against these Muslims. Whatever I have mentioned earlier, the 5 points that I have mentioned regarding Islamophobia in India is carried over by this group as well. I mentioned about Muslims being anti-Hindu, Muslims being violent, they're being traitors, they're being their population being increasing, the Mughal history, how do we do revenge against this? Everything can be seen in the writings of the leaders of RSS. You can see the book We and Our Nationhood Defined, which mentions in detail about these things, and also how Muslims in India, he says that the Muslims in India is a minority problem, quote unquote. The book, it clearly mentions that it's a minority problem, and this minority, how to solve this minority problem is being discussed in these books. So basically, if the RSS is against Islamophobia, I think they should come forward and say that we are against Islamophobia and this hate should not exist in India.
Do you think that Muslims of India are only supposed to counter Islamophobia or not the other liberals in the country? And second, in connection to that, could there be any, force or revenue from outside the country by the Indians who can pressurize the government to control Islamophobia, and that will reduce the, experiences of Islamophobia in everyday life?
Regarding the external forces coming in, we'll come into that. Regarding the liberals and other groups collaborating for bringing in a law, I think, but this is very clear. This is not a Muslim issue at all. Islamophobia is not a Muslim issue. Islamophobia is a social and political issue. This is something that has actually created a dent in the social fabric of this country. It is something which endangers the very concept of our country, where different identities coexist with all their identity traits, with all their diversities. So this is basically destructive to the country. All those people who believe in the idea of India and the idea of constitution, in the idea of freedom, equality, liberty, and justice, has to actually come forward and then demand to address this politically, socially, legally, and using all the domains of civilization. Actually, there's no question of which political groups or which political entities has to join. Should it be only a Muslim? There's no question about it. It's not at all a Muslim issue. It's not at all a Muslim problem. This is the problem that the country has to solve. Uh, that's one. And regarding um, other people from outside India supporting this, I think that's not a question at all, because we are living in a world where everything is a global village. If one injustice happens anywhere, people across the globe tends to fight against this and raise their voice against the injustice. Even at least at the level of social media, that does it. When we see an injustice happening in Europe, we tend to voice against it. So it's not a problem about geographical jurisdiction. It's basically a problem. It cannot be restricted on national boundaries. It is something that when Jews are being persecuted, when Jews were persecuted in that part of the globe, across the world, people raise their voices. This is not correct. When blacks are being persecuted in Europe and US, in America, people across the globe, universities, civil society groups, intellectuals, different institutions, they raise their voice against this apartheid and this discrimination against the blacks. So this is not restricted to boundaries or national borders. This is something that people acknowledge across the globe, because we are living in a globalized era.
In connection to that, I mean, just you can add that Faraz is asking how much intervention of Gulf countries against Islamophobia in India will affect to Indian Muslims or government of India.
I think regarding that, I don't think that we have to pursue things like that. It is natural thing that when an injustice happens, people tends to tweet. What we have seen in the last few weeks is that there has been a wave of activism or voicing against Islamophobia in India, in the Gulf countries. It's natural because we have at least 3 million Indians working in the Gulf countries, and that forms more than 90% of the total expatriates working anywhere in the world. So it is a high concentration of Indian expatriates working in one part of the globe. And it's natural that from that particular place, people tends to feel this heat and this injustice happening, and then they voice against it. It's natural. So I don't think that we need to discuss about how it will create pressures on this. I think that is out of the question. We as a country, it's a huge population, and and people who understands the basic essence of the Constitution: equality, liberty, fraternity, and justice, who are into policy making in our country, who are sitting in our parliaments. They should not wait for other people outside the country telling them and advising them to what to do and what mistakes are they doing. They should themselves understand what is the problem and then try to create affirmative actions.
Going back to a little on the question of data, what is the kind of authenticity of our data documentations? And it will be more, effective if you mention or throw some light on approaching legally, how legally we can approach and create database with certain examples, if you can give.
Basically, database is something that is like an MRI scan of an issue. Database gives you it gives you an angle, gives you a perspective of what the issue is, and based on this perspective, or based on this the image that you get out of this database, you tend to start creating an affirmative action or a solution to the problem. So when you create a database, it should be based on a methodology, a foolproof methodology, wherein there is no mistakes, there is no inconsistencies, there is no fake news being documented as real news. wherein there is no contentious data which can be questioned and then invalidated by certain questions. So it should be foolproof in all its sense. I think this particular seminar, since it's not about the methodology of documenting, and the people here are not going to involved in this whole issue of documentation. I think the methodology part can be discussed in an exclusive meeting. But as far as the legal affairs are concerned, I think based on the database, based on the things that arise from the database, I think we can create certain conclusions and start creating a demand for intervention. For instance, I would just like to recall the Nuremberg trial. After the World War, World War One, the Nuremberg trial, wherein the Jews, it is said that more than 93 tons of evidences have been dumped in front of the court to prove the fact that Jews are being persecuted, not only in Europe, but even in the American continents. So this documentation led to the anti-Semitism enactments in the Europe and US and in the American continents. So that is how it functions. So you document, and then it becomes an evidence to enact certain laws which addresses the problem, to issue to solve the problem.
There's one important question that Rohil is asking, that how these growing instances of Islamophobia in Indian context can be seen in the light of ahadith, especially those talking of religious development in Asian territory heading towards Qayamat, in fact. Is there any such quoting at all in authentic ahadith? And also, how could Arab nations be instrumental in curbing this rising wave of Islamophobia in Indian context that you have just answered? Yeah.
Yes, I think the question is about hadith and the Quranic texts, Islamic texts, speaking about Islamophobia. I did not actually do a detailed research on this, but what we all know is in the texts, in the hadith texts, you can see that in the last times, you can see hadith where it mentions that it will be so tough to express and to say that one is a Muslim, that it will be like putting a fire cube, a hot coal, a burning coal on his palm. It is as unbearable as that. So as far as the Islamophobia is concerned, I think it can be seen, it can be traced into the hadith. Detailed study and research need to be done on that. But we cannot, on saying this, we cannot say that all these things are mentioned in the hadith, and so it will happen and then it will vanish. No. So some people at least tends to believe that all these things are part of the prophecies that Prophet has mentioned, and whatever we do, we will have to face all these problems because it's already mentioned by the Prophet. So it's not like that. Prophecies are not to be taken in that sense. Prophecies are not to be taken in that sense. I would also mention that we need not go in solving the problem, because a Messiah is going to come. Once this Jesus or Isa alayhi salam comes, everything will be solved. So we did not work. So I think that kind of analogy, or that kind of reduction did not be done, should not be done. It's okay. Just to remind on that particular point. As far as the prophecies are concerned, it's basically to energize us. It's basically to also give us a perspective about what will be the end to this, and what is our responsibility. This cannot be solved unless and until we come in and then try to create a solution to this. So I would like to rather tell the questioner, I do not hear the name, to do a detailed research on the ahadith and also the Islamic texts, including Quran, which specifies about, which mentions about this. At this particular time, I also have tried to, I would like to quote an ayat from the Quran about how to deal with this problem. One ayat is that idfa billati hi ahsan fa idha alladhi baynaka wa baynahu adawatun ka'annahu waliyyun hamim wa ma yulaqqaha illa alladhina sabaru wa ma yulaqqaha illa dhu hallin alim. That you do difa, you do a defense of the evil with the best possible good that you have with you. So you defend evil with the good. That is how you defend. And Allah says, as a principle, if you adhere to this particular norm, this particular strategy, or this particular, it's not a strategy, it's a reaction from you. Then, if this is the reaction, if this positive reaction comes from you, the result, the end result would be that your biggest enemy will become your close friend. This is what Allah says. Even your biggest enemy will become your closest friends. So as far as the Muslim community is concerned, you cannot address this hate by using hate. You can only address hate by goodness, and then, but it may take some time. That is why this Quran ayat ends with the fact, with the part saying that idfa billati ahsan fa idha alladhi baynaka wa baynahu adawatun ka'annahu waliyyun hamim وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَلٍّ عَلِيمٍ. This is not possible unless and until you have patience. So patience is the first and foremost precondition to have this reaction. So as far as the community is concerned, as a whole, our reaction should be patience and goodness towards others, not hate. But that doesn't mean that you should not raise your voice against it. You should raise your voice against it. You should do legal actions. You should adhere to the laws and norms of the country, and then you try to do it democratically as possible and peaceful as possible, and things will change. That is how Quran deals with this.
Thank you. I'm clubbing couple of questions, Sohail Sahab. I mean, we'll be winding up now.
Yes.
Maybe this is the last question.
Okay.
Is basically that when civil society among Muslims in particular, they talk about, collaborating and fighting against Islamophobia. There are questions which suggest that can't Muslims be an alliance with the other communities who are oppressed, particularly Dalits in India, who have been everyday oppressed. So why not, while talking of Islamophobia, Muslims also raise voices against the injustice done to Dalits, because they are the largest population who could be good partner with the Muslims in living in the society. So can you elaborate, on that? Yeah.
Yes, actually, this is a very obvious question. I would like to actually apologize that while speaking, I've not used this word of Muslim Dalit unity and then joining hands together to raise a voice against this. This is because this is so obvious that when it comes to addressing a problem of injustice, addressing a problem of discrimination, it is it need not be mentioned at all. It's so obvious that all those people who are who believes in this basic notion of justice, who believes in an egalitarian society, who believes in the idea of goodness, they unite together and then they fight against injustice. And the second level is also about those people who are facing the same kind of discrimination and injustice. They fight together, joining their hands. This is exactly what you see across the globe. If you see in America, since 2001, Islamophobia has become a new normal, and it is so deeply penetrated in the society that everyone feels it. So what you have seen in the recent times is that in places like Texas, especially, that Muslims and the Mexican population, and also the minority, the oppressed groups there, uh, the blacks and the Hispanics, have been largely collaborating each other, and then trying to issue this, address this problem, joining hands together. That is what we see in the US. In the same way, you can see it happening in the African countries, in Australia, in Japan, in Asian countries, that the oppressed groups in these places are joining hands together to address this issue, because it is natural. Not only the oppressed class, but also those people who believe in goodness, who believes in justice, and who believes in the concept of egalitarian society. So it's natural, no need to mention at all that we all need to join our hands together. And it's been part of the Indian history that always the Dalit groups and the atrocities happened to the Dalits and the Harijans, the backward communities, have been the problem have been raised in the literatures, in the activism of the Muslim community as well. If you see the history of Muslim community, you can see that a lot of books and scholars have spoken. Organization, as far as Muslim organizations are concerned, they have been trying to align themselves with the Dalit groups and their politics, and also create a solidarity of people who are fighting against this injustice. So I think it's natural that we join our hands, and in the coming days it should strengthen more, so that it's not actually a strategic coalition. It's actually a natural coalition that should happen. And yes, and it need not be against the Brahmins. That is one thing that I would like to mention. It's not about one caste or one community or one ethnic group against the other community. This hatred against hate, posing hate against hate, is not something that we should adhere to. I would like to mention that as well. It should be inclusive. It should be based on certain values. Uh, yes, we'll talk about this in detail in another sitting, inshallah.
Uh, Thank you so much, Sohail Saab. I think on behalf of you and Democracy Dialogue, if you allow me to share that this talk has been really very informing, and to me personally, I got a lot of informations about documentation, and keeping that significance that we have been talking in the forum, that the Islamophobia is one, but then you don't document. And I think we would really request you again, and we would like to have second part of this, on especially on meteorology part, sometime whenever the time allows you to. And there are a lot of questions which is coming on that area. So maybe when we have, especially talking on documentations and then use of database, will help us across the country. People are connected to build up at their own level, because we are not able to connect each other and understand the role of documentations. So that is one. Friends, Democracy Dialogue is one very important forum which started, in fact, began in Hyderabad. And through this, we have been conducting several webinars. Lockdown has given a lot of opportunities to this forum. And we have been requesting people who are working at the grassroots doesn't mean that any one community, but then how the dialogue and activities of the people at grass can connect with the democratic procedure where we live into. So these kind of intentions are there with the team of Democracy Dialogue, where we think of bringing people like Sohail Saab, where he brought on, a global perspective and linked with the kind of actions we can begin with in India. So I'm on behalf of Team Democracy Dialogue, I thank the guest of the day. Thank you so much. And speaking on Ramzan Day is more meaningful because there were no break, as you said. And the question which are not answered now due to time paucity, we'll have in mind, and whenever Sohail Saab is available, we'll have second part, and then we'll bring those questions in more interactive mode. I'm sorry also because we could not show there. Sohail Saab, there are many requests that video, at least a speaker of the video should be available. So hopefully when we come back again, the video of the speaker will be available so that it is more, connecting.
Yes, I'm really sorry that we could not do the video because I was really apprehensive that this video, this may be which may break in between because of the inconsistent internet connection have in my house.
That's true. That's true. And that is the reason most of the audience keep video also switch off.
Yes.
And let me also announce that every week there are webinars on different issues. So we'll be inviting all of you through email and possible contacts you have shared with us. You may also like to see the past webinars. We'll be putting the links in our portal democracydialogue.in, which has just started. So it's very new and at infancy stage. You don't expect it's very much loaded with the material, but we'll be putting links. But these talks are also live on Facebook, so the videos will also be available in the Facebook links we share here. I thank everyone once again and wish you healthy stay at home. The lockdown has extended. Thank you, Sohail Saab, on behalf of.
Thank you so much. Stay at home. Be safe. Take care.
Bye bye.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.